right, everybody. I hope you're ready for Beekeeping 101 Class 2. We're going to start because by my clock, we only have a minute left and I'm just eager. So hopefully if you're attending this class, you might have had the opportunity to attend the first class. It was excellent. It covered a lot more about the bees' lives and anatomy, what you're going to see. We're going to cover more like the equipment you're going to use, honey extraction, products of the hive. Those are going to be our focuses today, and hopefully it will be interesting for everyone. Now, we're going to do a little bit of a recap just to talk about the bees. So you've got your queen worker drone. Your queen is obviously the mother of your hive. She runs the hive through the pheromone that she lets off. Their behavior is largely controlled by her. They're what's called a social insect, which means that all of the other worker bees, which are females and actually do have the capacity to lay eggs, forego that desire to lay eggs in order to allow one to reproduce for the entirety of the colony, making them a stronger hive overall. And the worker bees do just about everything else except mate with the queen. They will clean, they'll cook. As I tell the kids that I talk to, you know, they're over there taking care of the queen, making sure she's pampered. But they're also incredible. They haven't really caught bees napping, doing more than napping. They don't like to sleep. And they will, in a pinch, actually start laying eggs, but they can only lay haploid eggs, not haploid diploid eggs. So they have only the ability to lay drone eggs. If you have a laying worker in your colony, that's a severe problem. It usually means the death of the colony. It's like the last hoorah before they give out. The drone is a very important part, though, although people forget how important the drone is. We do need them for genetic diversity. The queen mates from anywhere from 15 to 30 drones on a mating flight. An incorrectly mated queen will only produce eggs for a couple of weeks. If they don't have enough drone diversity, or if they have too little drone diversity, you create problems inside the hive. They are very important, in spite of the fact they are considered the laziest bee in the hive. But I hope that as a beekeeper, you'll get to learn more about that and it will be interesting to you. All right, woodenware. We're gonna start with the top of the hive going down. You have a lot of different hives, but this hive that we're starting with is the broadest use hive. It's called a Langstroth hive. It was designed by L.L. Langstroth. The full name is Lorenzo Loring Langstroth, and he developed the movable frame hive. But there are a lot of additions since then. At the top, you've got your telescoping lid. A telescoping lid simply means that a piece fits inside another piece. And you can see the inner cover pictured as the second item on the screen on your left. You have your outer cover, which is really there to protect the hive. It's a little bit heavier duty. It's not as likely to fly off if you've got heavy winds in your area. And your inner cover. And those are actually very useful. People ask, well, why do we have two covers? The reason you might have two covers is because A, if you do have a severe wind, that thin line cover is more likely to stay on the hive because they propolize that down really well. And it's lightweight enough with a bit of an air pressure release, having a handhold in the middle. That I have seen severe winds blow off outer covers, but not the inner cover. And so your bees are still slightly protected. Number two is that in the heat, this is Texas, it's really hot. You can crack your lid and you can allow for the bees having a smaller gap that they can protect, but you still technically have full coverage. You're not going to get rain inside of it. You're not going to get as many problems with robbing. And it provides an air seal. I know it sounds a little bit weird, but all of us have seen the Yeti cups or a water bottle that's a double layer of thickness. It's providing a dead air space, and it allows them to keep their temperature correctly. It allows them to control the temperature a little bit better around the cluster of bees inside the hive. If it's cold weather, you will get condensation on the top of your hives because it's usually warmer on the inside of the hive than the outside, but you get it on the upper cover. And it drips only onto the inner cover and not directly onto the cluster of bees. So there are a couple of reasons that the telescoping lids are really useful, but they're not the only lids. You can use just about anything. You can use a board. They have migratory lids as well. Migratory lids are as simple as they can possibly be. They are a board with 2 ends on it. But that's not the only part of the hive, of course. You have what would be your super or your top box. It doesn't have to be a medium. There are 3 sizes inside a hive. There's the deep box, which we often call the brood box. There's the medium box, which we call a super. And then there is the shallow box, which we either call a shallow or we call a super. So those 2, medium and shallow, can also both be called supers. It's all about what you use them for. If you are a beekeeper who maybe has some back problems and don't want to lift 100-pound boxes, because they can get very heavy, especially this time of year, you might work strictly in supers. So you might have brood boxes that are supers and honey boxes that are that are mediums, none of them being deep. But most commonly they are used for honey, and that's because they're a little bit lighter. They can be extremely heavy when they have honey in them, up to 50 pounds if they're really full, but oftentimes they're about 30, 35 pounds or so. The shallows really only ever get up to a top weight of 30 pounds and usually are much lighter than that, like 15 or so. So people might use shallows and mediums if they want something lighter weight, something easier to control. You just have more of them is the difference. And then you have your queen excluder. Queen excluder looks like a metal grid that has slots that a worker bee can fit through, but a queen or a drone cannot. If you put this on, it's an excellent use if you're trying to figure out what side the queen's on, if you're getting ready to make a split, if you're trying to keep her out of your honey supers, which is the most common use, or if simply you put it on the bottom, right over the bottom board, in order to prevent her from potentially swarming. It's a thought that some beekeepers have that it might help that process, or to prevent that process, because the idea is they can't leave the queen behind. Not always 100% successful though. And then you have your deep box. This box is really hefty. It usually has a frame that's about 9 1/4 inch tall, and they can get heavy. If it's full of honey, it can be up to 100 pounds to lug around, or at least 50 pounds. On an average, they really run only about 30 pounds or so. They are very handy. Most of the time, the reason that people work in brood boxes because that's the area that's disturbed the least. You really don't usually lift it unless you're running what's called a double deep system, where you have 2 deep boxes stacked on top of each other. All of them are the brood chamber with honey on the sides, and you're using that instead of a deep box and a super. Those are a really handy hive to have around. Most people work in them, so you will see a lot of nooks and splits that are basically always going to be in deeps. More often than not, I have yet to see one that's provided in shallows. And then you have the bottom board. And you'll notice on the right of the screen that I've put up some examples of bottom boards that are perhaps a little different from what you may have seen. We have your regular bottom board. It works great. It does a wonderful job. I have plenty of these bottom boards. I also have homemade screen bottom boards where I've cut out an area for a screen and put a screen on. And then you have the screen bottom board at the top of the right-hand side. That screen bottom board is very popular right now. What it is used for is the idea that it helps with mite control. So it is a pest control method because if a mite falls on the ground, they don't get back up. They die if they actually get off of their host and fall to the ground. Now, if they fall to the bottom of a normal bottom board, they can catch another ride with another bee fast enough that they're fine. But it only has a minor effect. It's just that little bit that helps. And here in Texas, a lot of beekeepers like them because they provide a little bit of ventilation. It is quite hot out this time of year. So you have and then you have your hive stand. Hive stands can be anything. I've seen people put up cinder blocks and run a piece of landscape timber or 2 pieces of landscape timber and set hives on them like a little table. I've seen people make themselves nice welded hive stands, or you can have this more traditional one with a little kickboard. Just the idea is that it's not sitting straight on the dirt. That's because if you have flooding, or if you have flooding, or you have standing water or dirt get into the hive, you have a higher propensity for illnesses, such as foul brood and chalk brood and other spore-based diseases. They don't like that moisture. And it's usually something that I see if, say, a bottom board or the stand is tilted backwards a little bit, and they have water that has clearly been sitting in there for a while, the hive is usually much weaker over top. Now, I don't know if that totally contributes, but I have seen that as a regular occurrence if that happens. So if you ever set up your hive stand, you want to make sure that it has just an ever so slight tilt forward. Not a lot, just enough to make sure that it drains the correct way. And screen bottom boards, you don't have to worry about sitting water inside of them generally. You get plenty of airflow. They are often closed off in the wintertime. The wintertime for bees being the time that they really stop flying. Once it starts reaching into the lower 50s, you should put your protective cover over that screen bottom board. You can do it with a piece of cardboard, or some of the new bottom boards have screen covers that come with them. So you'll have an automatic provided for that. And the most commonly used hive stand that I have seen is probably pallets. And the second most by hobbyists would be actual cinder blocks. But if you use cinder blocks, make sure that your cinder block is faced where, you know, the holes inside of a cinder block are faced where you can look through them when you're looking at your beehive, not where the holes are facing up towards the hive, because then you'll get ants building right up to your hive. They just love those spots. So you always want to make sure that your cinder blocks are faced where you can see through them when you're out of the hive, and they're not facing up towards the hive. But yes, but there are different types of hive. I mentioned the Langstroth hive. The Langstroth hive is a really good hive. A lot of people like it because it's easy. The bees seem to like to build in that up and down pattern. But another favorite hive, especially in other countries, if you start getting into other countries like South America or Nepal or Europe, they really like They really like the top bar hive. The top bar hive's a little bit different to work with. Again, for those people who don't want to be lifting heavy boxes, this is the hive for you potentially. They can be a little trickier to take care of because you have to watch them. If they're too weak, they can have wax melting. And that is because you open it up and it sits like a trough in front of you. You have slats sitting on top of that trough shape. The trough shape is because the bees don't build to the sides of the bottom of the hive if it has a slight angle to it. Not too much. If it's straight, they might just attach the comb right to the side and you'll never be able to move it. If it has an angle, they build away from it just a little bit, which means you can actually pick up your little top bar with its piece of wax on it and look at it. With top bars, you can't go flipping around. You have to hold it upright and look at it, and you have to be very careful and turn it around to look at both sides. Otherwise, you're going to break off the wax because it is 100% wax-based. That top bar may just be a little triangular piece of wood that they build off of. And it is considered a very natural way because you get new comb every year that they're working on. But it can create some difficulties with feeding and providing treatment because it's not the traditional Langstroth. However, there are people who work them and like them. You will find more people working Langstroths because they're convenient. The flow hive, a relatively new invention. They're getting popular here in America. It is the idea that you can have a normal box underneath it, and yes, that normal box would be basically a Langstroth, either in an 8 frame or a 10 frame. It would be a Langstroth underneath with a super, aka your honey holding device, on top. It must have a queen excluder on it because you do not want to let your queen get up there at all. In a normal hive, if your queen climbs up to the top and starts laying eggs, It's not a big deal. You find her, you make sure she's down, you put a queen excluder on, and they'll clear up that brood and they'll start putting honey in it, and it's not an issue. You do not want that with these hives, because these hives have a frame that has the ability to shift. It does like a little seismic shift, and the honey leaks out down through that shift and comes out in your honey jars like you see here. Now, I would personally have some issues with robbing if I had that honey exiting out, but the bees don't seem to mind it in these pictures oftentimes. It was originally designed in Australia. There are, I guess, what you might call knockoff varieties built here in America, but they are growing in popularity. People like them. They are expensive to get started on. And my suggestion to you beekeepers who want to start them, you have to start with the Langstroth first. You have to have a living, growing hive inside a Langstroth. So you got to start there before you put on your special supers. They are still really cool. Someday I want one to see how they fully run. However, they do have a lot of moving parts, so keep that in mind. Breaking of those parts can be a problem. Now, the gear that you need as a beekeeper, these things are really important. You need your smoker. The smoker is extremely important because when you provide smoke and you put it on the bees, if there's an aggression pheromone out, which normally smells like bananas, to most people it smells like bananas, it does to me, it covers that alarm pheromone. If the queen is upset or if the bees are upset, you're providing smoke on the bees in order to keep them from killing their queen out of aggression or upset. So it also is a little bit of a protection for your queen. It's protection for you. If you get stung, you'll want to scrape that out and then smoke it, because if they smell that sting on that area, it'll keep stinging that same spot. And it's usually a weak spot if it gets all the way through. You can use any kind of smoker fuel that you need. People use burlap, people use corn cobs. Dried mulch is what I commonly use. Like, I started with my shredded paper from my junk mail, but they also sell wood pellets and they sell alfalfa starters. There's all sorts of stuff available for starting a fire, but you can use whatever you find in your yard most often. The juniper trees have a lot of sap. I dry out a few juniper leaves and I stick them on when I want to start it. And then after it's started and I put my paper in and my mulch on, I actually will coil a fresh juniper branch, or you can use grass or any green item that you have inside the top in order to keep it from putting out hot smoke. I don't want it shooting jets of flame out. I want it to be cool smoke when I use it. You also have your bee brush, which is most often used in honey extraction, but some people will look at their frame and brush the bees aside a little because it's so thick with bees. You want to see in there and make sure that everything's looking good. You want to see that brood. It should be a creamy, beautiful white. If it's not, you might have a problem. The hive tool. I've gone into my hives without a smoker and without a brush, but you cannot get into them without a hive tool. If you're a beekeeper, buy an extra hive tool. Take it from me, you will lose it in the grass at least once, and then you'll be hunting around for it and you'll go, I have one, I put it away somewhere, I'm gonna go get it. And you'll find it when you mow 3 months later or something like that. No joke, it's happened. I always keep a couple extras around because they stick everything together. All of those pretty little boxes, all of those Langstroth frames are stuck together with propolis, and it is hard to get them out. You can actually pull the nails out of your boards just by trying to pry up any of those frames. Imagine just trying to grab them. On the right-hand side, you can see that we have a picture of gloves. This is up to a preference. I know beekeepers who actually don't really use gloves. I do. I feel more comfortable with them. It makes it easier for me to look at my frame and just say, you know, I'm not going to get stung. I can handle it quickly. I can be out of here faster without bothering the bees as long. And then it's got a jacket, but you can use an old school veil. Any kind of veil or protective gear, you really do want to protect your face. You never know, especially here in Texas, when you're going to get into a hot hive. You know, you could have cracked it open a dozen times before, and this hive could have been as mellow as can be. You're like, I don't need my veil. The moment you crack it open without a veil, that's when they decide to get angry with you and turn a little bit spicy. So don't try it. The other day, I left my smoker on my hive and I had just been pulling honey and all the bees were mad. I'm sitting in my truck looking at it in my bee suit still going, oh man, do I want to put on my veil again? And I, of course, go running out there to get my smoker off, and I got stung on the ear for my troubles and got a couple bees caught in my hair. But it's still fun. I still enjoy beekeeping. You make silly decisions like that sometimes. Oh, proper footwear. I don't have this pictured, but you really do need proper footwear. Wear boots. If you have a problem with aggressive bees, make sure that your boots are duct taped, or they even sell like little Velcro strips that you can close up your legs with really quickly. It's handy. Again, the moment you don't do it, one of your hives will turn spicy on you. Although I won't lie, I have gone into my bees in socks because I was very tired and making silly mistakes. Every day is a little bit different with beekeeping. How honey is made. Yay, we're done with equipment. We're going to talk about how honey is made. Honey is an extraordinary product. It's something that the whole world knows about, and most of the world consumes honey on a regular basis. It's just like the people up in Antarctica or Greenland that maybe don't. It's even in just about every ancient text you can find references to honey. It's amazing. It never spoils. They found it in King Tut's tomb, and it was still considered edible, although I imagine it's very sandy and I wouldn't have wanted it. So first, how honey is made. You know that the bee is going to go to the flowers. You're like, it's made from nectar. I know this question already. It is made from nectar. The bee is going to go to like 200 flowers in order to get a drop of honey, because they take that little bit of nectar that they drink, they put it in their honey stomach, they have more than one stomach, and they fly it back to the hive, usually with a load of pollen, like these bees that you see here. They fly back to the hive, and you can see these two bees passing honey from one to another. They literally share it between multiple bees. The bees that are the collecting bees fly in, give it to the guard bees run it up to the worker bees that are halfway up the hive. Those worker bees run it up all the way to the super. So it passes from many bees before it actually gets to the honeycomb it's going to go in. And that is an important process. That is what actually makes it honey. When they do that, they add enzymes to it every time they handle that honey. And one bee does not have enough enzymes for a stomach full of honey, say, it does not have enough enzymes to mature it into what honey is, where it's the antibacterial, anti-inflammatory that it is today. So it's very important that it's passed from bee to bee. It takes a lot of bees. One bee in their whole life is considered to only make 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey. That is a drop of honey. It's not very much. It takes thousands of bees for that jar of honey you have. I tell you, after you think about that, you'll be scraping out your extractor really, really well, making sure that you get every last drop you can get. It's important. And then once it gets up to those worker bees up there, they start maturing it. And your honey can be any color it needs to be. It can even be purple. That's huckleberry honey. And I have seen green honey recently. I don't know where it came from, but I did see some green honey in my hive. It was the weirdest thing. But once they get it, they actually take it and they put it on their tongue and they roll it up and down their tongue. And when they roll it up and down their tongue, they're essentially air drying it. They're allowing the moisture to get off of it as they go. And they may repeat this process for quite some time. Then they put it in the cell and they'll actually fan it. You'll open up and you have unmature honey and you'll see bees on there fanning away, trying to make that moisture content drop down. Because honey, if it is below a certain moisture content, usually 20 to 22, if it is higher than 20 and up to 22, it will ferment on you, and not the good kind of mead fermenting. It will ferment on you and be funky. And even the bees don't really like taking it back after that point. They're like, you've ruined it. So you want to make sure that your moisture content is low enough. If they've capped it over and that honey is capped, it is done. They know what they're doing. It is properly done. It is probably around between 18 and 16% moisture content. So the lower your moisture content, the better, and the more sure you can be that you're not going to have any kind of fermentation. Honey can also collect different flavors. You've heard everybody talk about snow on the prairie. It makes the honey sort of an unpleasant spiciness on the back of the throat. But there's also bitterweed, which makes it bitter. And then you have things like goldenrod, which affect the smell, but when I tasted it, it didn't seem to affect the taste of the honey. Pretty extraordinary. So you want to be very mindful about what's going into your honey. That's why here in Texas, we extract before the fall, because a lot of those unpleasant plants come out in the fall. And I think God got awfully creative. He's like, you know, I'm going to make it to where they don't want that later honey. And so the bees get to keep it. There's actually honey that has been called hallucinogenic. And I'm sure people have heard about this. It creates a wow. But there are actual historical records of the local people knowing better, like in ancient Rome times, knowing better than to eat the honey, but they served it to invading armies. And when they were all basically stunned and laying around that evening, the whole village came out and took care of business. So there is actual precedent for it, but there's never been any confirmed this is hallucinogenic honey, at least not here in the English speaking language. I believe there are some areas in Nepal where it is publicly sold. Capped honey, this is what it looks like. This is not a completely capped frame. I put this one up. You want to see that sort of stuck together, all one capping. That is not brood. That is capped honey. It's looking really good. Cappings are some of the best wax you're going to get because they are new. They're usually white and beautiful, and that's the top quality cappings you can have. But you can see that the edges there aren't fully mature. Now, sometimes you're getting to your harvest, you're like, the snow on the prairie is about to bloom, other items are about to bloom that are gonna make a bitter honey taste. I need to pull my stuff, but maybe it's not fully capped. Well, if the honey flow ends suddenly, you will want to check it, but even if it's not capped, you can pull it. You normally take the frame and you give it a hearty shake to make sure that honey doesn't come flying out all over you. If it comes flying out, leave it for the bees. It's not ready for you. If it stays in there, even with a couple of good shakes, then it's probably fine. It's a low enough moisture content. They might have run out of honey to cap it with because it takes a lot of resources in order to create wax. But it's ready for harvest. So how to harvest? How to help those bees move out of the way? There are a lot of different methods. Some of the most popular methods right now are the chemical methods. They're used with fume boards. You can see a couple of examples up there. We have honey bandit, which is kind of almondy smelling. It's kind of irritating. Do not spray any of these directly on the frames of honey. They are only meant for your fume boards. You don't want to make that mistake. And then you've got honeybee gone, which also smells kind of almondy, but it's an irritant. The bees don't like it. Once you spray it on the board, you put it on there, the sun heats it up. Like some of them look a little bit like a solar panel, and the old school ones are painted black to absorb the heat. And once you put it on there, the bees are like, ugh. And they go, I gotta get out of here. And they just start running down. You don't wanna leave it on too long because your bees will all start leaving. They will all climb to the outside of the hive. They might even create a swarm like all of the sudden because it's too irritating. So you don't want to leave that on too long. And then you have honey robber. This is the one everyone's going to remember if you use it. It smells very bad. The bees don't like it. It is by far the most effective of the three, and it's the quickest acting. But it smells bad. It smells kind of like someone threw up and stepped in dog poop and had a bad day at the gym all at once. All in one delicious bottle. Yes. You didn't hear that, but a family member of mine just went, It is really bad. But there are other methods, fortunately, non-chemical ways. So for your beginning beekeeper, this is probably the way you're going to use. You're going to get yourself a sheet, an old grubby sheet. You're going to get it completely wet, and then you're going to put it on your wagon, the back of your truck, or just the ground where you're planning to put your supers. you're going to get your smoker lit really well. And then you're going to puff your bees really hard. You want that smoke in there. And then you're going to take your hive tool, you're going to pry up all of those frames, and one by one, you're going to have you're going to take an empty super or a box or some sort of container and put it on the side there. And on that sheet, ready to go, it doesn't have bees on it, and you're going to brush off that frame, make sure it's free of bees as you can make it. You're going to put it in your super really fast, cover it over with that wet sheet. And that is the brushing method. You repeat that on every frame. So you take another frame, you brush it off, just so you remember, brush it off. Oh, there are bees on there, you're still brushing it off. And you put it in your super and you cover it back over with that wet cloth. The wet cloth is really because if it's dry, it tends to blow up, even in the slightest breeze. And because the bees have figured out how to crawl into it at that point. So you really do want the wet sheet. And if you use it once, it will not be usable again because it gets propolis on it and it's forever stained. I have my designated honey sheets. They're grubby, but I use them every year, and every now and then I get a new one because eventually they get holes in them. And then you have the fume board method. That on the bottom corner on the right, you can see the fume board. That is what most of the new ones look like, but the old ones are just painted black. A sheet of metal plated painted black. They both work really well. I've used both varieties and I've been very happy with it. The last method is actually not used very commonly because of hive beetles, which they talked a little bit about pests in Beekeeping 101. This is an escape board. You can see the triangular method. There are a couple different varieties, but it basically works like a one-way gate. It gets placed between the super with all your honey in it and your brood box that has the exit in it. You can't have an exit at the top because those bees will automatically have to go down. They have to go out and get water. And a bee may go, I'll go get everyone a drink, and run down, but then she can't get back up to get everyone that drink. So the next bee goes, I'm gonna go get a drink, and they go down until after a couple of days, all of the bees have exited that top super or those top couple of supers. It is a natural method. The only problem is you have to get your timing right, because if they're left unattended too long, you can get wax moths in them, and more especially, you can get hive beetles. Hive beetles will destroy your honey if it is left alone. That is why you pull your honey the same day that you extract it, because they will get in there and they will make a slimy mess. They will put eggs in there and larvae in there, and your honey will be unusable. The only thing that will appreciate them will be the chickens, truly. But even your bees usually won't work it after that point because the larvae cover it with feces. It's not very desirable. All right, extracting. So you pulled your honey, you figured out how to get the bees out of the way. You want your extractor, and you have your extractor right there. That is an electrically driven, in this picture, day-dance extractor. The thing that he is cutting over is an uncapping tank, but they sell smaller versions of them, or if you're being really cheap, you can use a large pot and cut yourself a piece of wood to the right size and stick a nail in it, facing up towards the beekeeper. Because you have basically a wooden bar across anything, whether it be a pot or a tub or a fancier tub. You can put your bar right there, you put your nail through it, and that nail is facing up because you place your frame on it, and your frame pivots really nicely that way. It just swings right around, and you will uncap it. You can see the man has empty supers on one side, and he's got his extractor running on the other, and he's uncapping. He's placing his frames behind him, and as this is done, extracting, he'll pull those frames out, put them back into the empty boxes, and the ones that he's uncapped while that extractor was running will go back into the extractor. It is a time-consuming process. If you've got a lot of supers, make sure to plan a whole day for it. I've extracted twice this week for different things. I extracted 20 boxes on Thursday, and I extracted 20 boxes on Saturday. And those 20 boxes on Saturday, I started at like 6 because I had to. I got delayed, and I was up until 3. So make sure that you don't stay up that late. It's too tiring. You start making silly mistakes. Now, one of the interesting tips is when you put them into your extractor, you want to make sure to balance it. these are a couple of different extractors. You can have a hand crank traditional one like the one you see on the left, and it works great, especially if you have a bunch of siblings or kids that you can pass that job off to a couple of times, because it takes a long time. You're like cranking for say 10 minutes to try to get that honey out, and it's not light. They are called centrifugal force machines. And there are two varieties really. You'll notice the hand crank one is a 2-framer. It can fit either 2 deeps or 2 mediums. But once you crank that on one side, you actually have to take those frames out, flip them over, put them back in, and crank them on the other side as well. So you got yourself twice the work. Now, if you only have, say, 1, maybe 2 boxes a year, you could totally do this. You could probably manage it in half a day, no problem. But if you have more, you might consider a larger extractor. This is probably about a 12 to 20 frame extractor that you're looking at in the right-hand side, and it is probably electric. Once it gets going, you want to make sure that they are well balanced. Otherwise, it's like a washer that's off balance. It goes, and it will potentially tip over or cause damage. You don't want to do that. So you run your frames and then you drain your honey out while you're unloading your frames and reloading your frames. It is a time-consuming process, but there is nothing more rewarding than getting your honey out for the first time and seeing what color it is. I hope that you guys can find a honey competition to enter into. I hear that Texas State Fair is looking at still trying to provide some of their artisanal competitions, such as their honey competition. Some other tools that you need for extraction. I mentioned the uncapping tank. These are some uncapping tools, well, some of the uncapping tools. You have a capping scratcher, which is for the pieces of your comb which have sort of sunk beneath the level of the wood. They're short, perhaps, or they're just a corner piece that didn't quite get cut. And you just take it and you scratch it. It's open. They now have rolling uncappers where it rolls and uncaps them. You have to roll it a few times. It's not like a, oh, I've rolled it twice. That's good. You go, and you get all of your cappings open. Otherwise, you're going to put it in your extractor. You're going to spin it for that whole time, and you're going to pull it out and look at it. And you're like, there's still honey in there. I did that wrong. It's a little bit of trial and error the first time. And then a strainer, very important. Now, people talk about strain or unfiltered all the time. Unfiltered doesn't mean you haven't strained it. Straining is what you see here. You're basically getting out the bees' legs and the particles of wax or the little bits of brood or the hive beetles or whatever was in your honey before. You're getting it out that way. Oh my goodness, I've been talking a long time. I've got to hurry up. And then unfiltered means that you didn't superheat it and shoot it through a super fine strainer, because that is usually the result. These are some more pictures of uncapping. This is what it looks like when you're straining it out. And then the most important tool is probably the uncapping knife. This is a non-electric uncapping knife that you see in the left-hand upper corner. And that uncapping knife is exactly what it looks like. You uncap, you hold the frame, you cut downward so you're not cutting upward. You can get a heated knife. Those heated knives are really nice, especially if you're working with any kind of older comb that you've maybe had for a year or two, because they get tougher as the years go on. That new comb's usually nice and easy to slice though. And then you get your honey of various colors. Products of the hive. Products of the hive are extraordinary. You have pictured in here, you've got like some beeswax lotion, some honey soap, a Ross round. You have creamed honey, you have pollen. You also have liquid honey that's also got comb in it. It's called chunk honey. All of those products are incredibly useful. So we're just going to talk about them real quick. Product of the hive, beeswax. You can see the Ross round in the corner. People sell that and just eat it whole. But there are beard waxes, door varnishes, violin varnishes, beard wax. I can't get over that one. When I saw it, I was like, oh yeah. It's one of the oldest products that was ever used for waterproofing because it's meltable and you can apply it. It's a lot nicer smelling than lanolin. And when it's used for candles, it actually burns about 20% slower because it is such a pure product that it consumes the whole of the candle. There's no smoke. That's why if you go into churches that burn candles, you will normally see beeswax candles. And I think the smell is beautiful. But there's a lot of different opinions. It's also used in lipsticks. That's probably the largest product that it's used for today is in cosmetics. But there are all sorts of things that it is used for to this day. It is considered a pure and really excellent product. They also have beeswax cloths. You'll see that in the lower corner. People who don't like plastic wrap are moving to these old school waxed cloths, and it's just a cloth that has been dipped in pure beeswax because it's a clean product. It doesn't go rancid. It's a lot better for that than, say, lanolin or pig fat, as you might imagine. And then, of course, candles, bars of soap, apparently coating missiles with, but they also used it for all sorts of things you would never expect to see it in, like coating the blades of ice skates or anything like that. It's just a really incredible product. I hope you learn more about it. Pollen. I love this picture of the bee. This is what pollen looks like on a bee. And I always tell people, look at, it's got hair all over its body. And those bees get in the pollen, they just roll around. They love it. They think it's amazing. It's their protein source, but people like to eat it here. They will eat pollen to help with allergies. The diagnosis is that the idea is that if you consume pollen in small quantities, it's helping immunize you a bit like a vaccination would from whatever pollen's making you sick in the air. People ask me all the time, well, is this true? Well, there's not enough research to say if this is actually true. People say, well, do you have allergies? Have they helped? And I go, no, I've never had allergies. Maybe it's because I eat honey. It's an interesting hypothesis and yet unproven. People collect it off of the hives by using pollen traps as pictured in the lower left-hand corner. Pollen comes in all colors. I've been seeing green and white pollen, which is very unusual for me, but you can get it black and red. You can get it in yellow and orange. Those are the most common colors that you will see, is yellow and orange. But people like to take it for health food purposes. It's filled with amino acids that it's made very popular for. People who are athletics like to take it. Propolis. Propolis is extraordinary. It is antibacterial. They use it to glue everything together. It is non-water soluble. The Native Americans used to chew on it for sore throats because and what is found out later is that it specifically targets the strep bacteria that you might get. It can be kind of spicy. It's a little unpleasantly flavored usually. It's also made into homemade tinctures that are often rubbed on wounds or like skin irritations, especially topical treatments is mostly what you see it for, although people do take it orally in different ways. But it's a goo. They literally collect the sap of trees and turn it into propolis by adding enzymes to it like they do with honey. So that antibacterial quality, that product is used to varnish violins. It is used to it is used to varnish all sorts of things, and it's considered a preservative as well. Ooh, what's going on? I want to move forward. Nope, that's back. There we go. All right. So these are a couple of items. Apparently L'Oreal has a product. I was looking up products of the Hive. L'Oreal has a product that it's used for glowing skin. They have different oral treatments, as I said, or topical treatments that are supposed to be good for skin irritations like poison ivy. It's also considered to be good for eating. It's considered to be good for the throat specifically. Oh. After the harvest, you can set out your hives. This is in the wrong spot. I'm sorry about that. You can set out your hives to be cleaned by the bees, but if I were you, I would set them well away from your hives so that it doesn't encourage robbing. You want to make sure to store your supers after you've pulled your honey, and the way you do that is with moth crystals or paradichlorobenzene. There's also paramoth and moth crystals. You can usually find them or you can usually find moth crystals, that is, inside the dryer, like the laundry section of your local Walmarts. And if not, ask, and they'll usually get it for you eventually if you keep pestering them. But you want to tie up your trash bags better than the person that you see on the left. So you can put your whole hive in a trash bag, you tie it up, you want to make it airtight essentially, and you put your moth crystals in there in order to keep the moths out of your wax, because they will destroy your wax. They will make a lot of work. You want to take care of that woodenware. All that equipment we talked about doesn't always come cheap. You want to make sure that it's taken care of, because those moths will actually burrow into the wood and destroy your woodenware if they're given enough time, rather than just your wax. That's where they like to pupate. The most important product that bees give to us is really pollination. Pollination is the most important thing. It's not something that you see all the time. It's not something you think about when you think of products of the hive, but they pollinate over 90 different crops in America. They are incredibly important. And I want people to start noticing them when they're out there in the crops, in the almonds, in the squash, in the watermelon. All of those things are important for them to be taken care of in. It really is. 1/3 of our food is pollinated by bees. Our massive crop systems, like this field of sunflower seeds that you see here, our massive crop systems could not be supported with an insect, a remarkable insect that can live inside a box, that is managed by mankind, that we get products from and can be shipped across the United States to pollinate all over the United States and the world. So I hope you've enjoyed that. I think I saw a question pop up. Let me see if I can find how to get to that. Mike, do you know how to get to the questions?
Yeah, on your toolbar, you can open the chat. If it doesn't show, you can click more.
This one? No, that's not it. Toolbar up here.
It's just called chat. And Rhonda had posed a question earlier.
Oh, did you see what it was?
Yeah. Have you found the chat window yet?
Or, no, more. Let me check out more. Is it in more?
Yeah, chat.
There it is, 3. Here we go. If you have any questions for Shannon the presenter, okay, that's just me.
Wax.
If I have a nice empty beeswax comb, can I put it into a jar with honey, and will it fill
And work for honeycomb.
and work for a honeycomb bottle? Well, it's a pretty piece of comb, but it's not actually what is used for cut comb. You generally want capped wax that you're putting in, and I actually have pieces here, but I put them in a bag next to me. So you can do it. It looks nice, but it's not truly chunk honey unless the honey is already inside there capped. And if you're ever wanting to do it for competition, you want that to be a perfectly even piece that is fully capped 100%, and it should be the same honey as what is in the jar so that they look equal. But you could do it. It's a scenic thing, or not scenic, it's
Visual.
appealing visually, but it's not strictly chunk honey. All right. I think that's, thank you so much. Thank you. All right. Well, if any of you have any more questions, you are welcome to email me. My name on email is Beekeeper Shannon. No shock. Sorry, beekeepershannon@gmail.com. No capitalization, no spaces. But you should give me a couple of days to answer because I'm not fast on the draw. I did have a question that was posed earlier. I did speak to them in person actually, but the question was, can I move my hives to face my house? Because they needed to paint their fence line. And the answer is yes, you can move your hives to face your house. You just want to move them slowly So 3 feet a day is the rule. You don't want to move them more than 3 feet a day. Otherwise, if you move them all at once and it's, say, a couple yards away, all your bees will fly right back to wherever your hive used to be, and you'll have some really angry bees for days. You don't want to do that. Couple of feet a day or every time you get into them, and you can move them there. And the other part of that question was, can I face them north? Okay, when you put down your hives, the orientation that is suggested is that you face them south because they don't get a cold north or eastern wind. However, if you are literally facing them at a house, you're probably not going to have a problem with facing them north. I wouldn't leave them there for forever because you kind of want them to get sunshine on that front board. They like it. And you don't want them to be in full shade for a long time, because if they're on the northern side of your house, they're going to have a lot of shade, especially in the winter time when they should have a little more sunlight. But overall, you can leave them there. That's fine as long as they have basically a well-protected entrance. All right, everybody. Thanks for going on the ride with me. I hope that you had a great talk and that I answered some interesting questions, and that you might sign on for Beekeeping 103, which I believe I will also be teaching. And I'm looking forward to it.